Drink beer, it's good for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue, and I'm gonna drink till the day that I die.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video I will present a full guide to making your own milkshake IPA. The milkshake IPA style of beer is certainly a very interesting one. This relatively new style of beer combines such ingredients as wheat malt, oats, lactose, otherwise known as milk sugar, with various different types of fruit, and also, as you would expect, an abundance of different hops. For those of you that have tried brewing fruit beers before, you will realise that brewing with fruit is not exactly an easy thing to get right. I will start by guiding you through this process. One of the biggest concerns in brewing with fruit is that we don't introduce anything bacterial or anything nasty into our brew. We will at no point be boiling the fruit, so we need to be very careful with what we're adding. Our fruit will actually be added just after high fermentation, so you will wait until the high fermentation is finished, and this is now the time to add your fruit. One thing that you must do to prepare your fruit for the process is put it in the freezer for at least 3 days before you add it. You should also allow the fruit to thaw before you add it. There are 2 reasons why we freeze our fruit before we add it. Firstly, this will break down the enzymes in the fruit and allow for a better fermentation. And secondly, but just as important, we will kill any nasties, such as bugs and bacteria that might be in the fruit. If you are intending to use fresh fruit, then I would recommend that you inspect the fruit thoroughly, and if need be, remove any bugs from the fruit. A smart way around this is to actually use pre-frozen fruit. This is what I do. I actually buy those frozen fruit packs that are intended to be used for making smoothie drinks. When adding your fruit to the beer after high fermentation, I'd recommend putting it into a hop sock, as shown here, or a muslin bag. This just makes it very easy to remove from the beer before you actually transfer it or bottle it. So here is my recipe for this style of beer. You will actually find the full text of this in the YouTube description also for your convenience. You will notice that I'm using Pilsner Malt here as my base malt. You could of course use Pale Ale Malt. I chose Pilsner just to give the brew a bit more of a crispness. You will note that I'm using a British ale yeast here despite the fact that this is an American IPA style. Don't worry, this is totally 2 style. You will note that I'm using a lot of different types of hops here in fairly large quantities. It's very important that when you actually finish the boil on this one that you will boil for at least 5 minutes and let it stand for a further 5 minutes. This will ensure that you don't end up with a pump blockage. There's also a fair amount of dry hops that go into this brew, and I've left the days fairly open depending on your taste. If you're unsure about dry hopping, then consult my video that deals with that on my channel. Just for fun, here's what I'm going to be using as a label for this one when it does get bottled, and I'd like to thank my good friend Anton for his assistance in making this label. Okay, so let's get on to the brew day itself. So the first thing that I want to draw attention to is my grain crush. The grain crush that I use on this particular brew isn't as fine as the one that I used on my last one. But because this brew doesn't have any of the issues that a reiterated mash can suffer with, there's really no need. So now it's time to start doughing in. It is of course vitally important to do this very gradually, and I would certainly recommend that you stir from the top, the middle and the bottom. We don't want any dough balls here. The more grain that you add, the harder this should become. So I'm now at the stage where I've added all of the grain, and it's really important to give it a really good working, as you can see that I'm doing here. From what I've seen live with home brewers and what I've seen on YouTube, this is an area that a lot of people really need to pay a lot more attention and effort into. If you are someone who is not getting as high as, say for example 75% efficiency, this should be very easily achievable with the Grainfather, and this is one key area in which you can look at and improve and hopefully see an extra result. In time you'll realise by the feel and also by the look when you're actually finished mixing, and this one's now ready and done. So it's now time to add the mash plate, and I recommend that you add this sideways as you see here. Push it to the grain and then give it a little lift up. This is another efficiency trick. Now it's a case of removing the middle cap, pushing the next piece on, not really sure what to call that actually, and then I add my aftermarket sink strainer. I find that this does a very nice job of filtering out some of the inevitable little pieces of grain that will flow through your pipe during circulation. So after putting on the glass lid and adding the sparging arm, it's now time to start the mash. What you see here is actually the beta version of the current Grainfather Connect app, which actually has recipes that are on the cloud. Very, very useful. Okay, so now it's on with the mash, and this is a very, very easy one. So we start with mash in at 65 degrees C for 60 minutes, and then we go at 75 degree for 10 minutes. And already I think you'll agree that this is looking like a very nice wort. Okay, so up with the grain basket now. Okay, so on with the sparge now, and I cannot stress enough how important it is to be sparging evenly and slowly. Add a small amount of sparge water at a time and let it drain down completely before adding more. I know it takes more time this way, but you certainly will notice an extra efficiency level. Okay, so we're now at the boil, and you'll notice one thing about this particular brew, and it's to do with the grain bill itself. An awful lot of protein going on here. It's totally essential that you stir all of this into the beer, as you can see that I'm doing here, to ensure that these proteins actually sink down. So that's all cleaned up now, and this beer has a 90-minute hop addition for bittering, so in it goes. With my 90-minute hop addition now in, I start the timer on the 90-minute boil. And with that done, it's now time to stir the hops in. You certainly don't need to spend a long time doing this each hop addition, but 30 seconds or so is probably about right, unless we're talking about an awful lot of hops in addition, in which case you may wish to spend longer. With the grain bill of this particular brew, I found myself stirring in the foam an awful lot, and it's important to do this as it builds up. One thing that I don't list on my recipes is the use of yeast nutrient. I consider this a given that you would use this with every brew. Even the healthiest yeast in the best wort in the world will still need a little bit of help, and this is generally in terms of zinc deficiency. Yeast nutrient will provide this. You can help yourself an awful lot just with some basic organisation during your brew day. Part of this is organising all of your different boil additions with times accordingly. The white powder you see in the picture there is actually lactose. Nothing illegal about it at all, despite its look. The use of lactose in this brew is partly why it gets its name as milkshake IPA. Lactose is also known as milk sugar. Despite being a sugar, I wouldn't call it a very sweet effect that it adds to the beer. What it does do though is give a nice amount of body to the beer. Lactose is actually an unfermentable sugar, so the yeast certainly won't be eating this, but it will have a nice effect on the resulting beer. On my recipe I've actually added the time of 10 minutes to add the lactose. This is fairly typical for an addition of sugar. In reality it doesn't really matter when you add the lactose during the boil. What is important though is to break up the lactose as you're adding it so that it dissolves into your boil. You will find that lactose is quite hard to dissolve unless you have a very nice boil going. Just as I suggest with all sugars, you should check the bottom of your Grainfather for any elements of this sugar, just to make sure that it doesn't burn on the bottom. We certainly don't want that. Okay, so it's now time for the 15-minute additions, which is some hops and also some yeast nutrient. And as you can see here, what I've done is I've combined the two of them in the same glass. So straight after giving these a good stir in, what I've done is I've attached the counterflow chiller to the Grainfather. The purpose here is to run the wort through the counterflow chiller for a couple of minutes just to sterilise it. This is because as soon as I put my 0-minute or whirlpool hops in, I want to give this a really good stir up. As you probably noticed by the recipe, there's quite a few hops in this one, so the whirlpool is absolutely essential to avoid clogging the pump. As you've probably seen me do in previous videos, I usually use a brewing spoon to do this, but keeping in mind the amount of hops that are involved in this one as a 0-minute addition, I've got a new toy to play with.
Say hello to my little friend!
Okay, so yeah, this is actually a mixer, industrial standard, and this will fit nicely onto my drill just to really pump up that whirlpool. Okay, so in go my whirlpool hops. And now let's let Thor the Whirlpooler do his thing. Man, this feels good, I have to say, but you got to be pretty careful with these because if you start going too fast, then one of two things is probably going to happen. Firstly, you can knock your pump off, and you really don't want that. And also you could start squirting boiling hot water all over yourself and all over your brew room. My wife would be furious. So with those two things in mind, do note my technique. What I'm doing with the drill is I'm slowly squeezing it, it is speeding up a little, and then I lay right off. When whirlpooling manually with a regular spoon, what I would normally do is do this for about 5 minutes. But this is a fair bit more efficient, so I've done 3 minutes here. If you are thinking about getting one of these, make sure it doesn't have any paint on it at all. And if you can't get a pure stainless steel one, then zinc plated is okay, but you may find that after a certain amount of time that starts to degrade. Always inspect these before using them. If you see any rust or anything like that, then just disregard it. And like anything in brewing that is coming into close contact with your wort, it must be squeaky clean and sterile. You will find that after you've done your whirlpooling, particularly if you use a power tool in this way, that your temperatures will have dropped quite a bit already, and that's very useful. Be sure to wait at least 5 minutes before you start chilling your wort and switching the pump on. This will allow all of the hops to settle and will allow easy flow of your pump. So my wort is now at the correct temperature to start flowing into my fermenter, and I've got that process going now. You will note that I have actually rigged up my own system for adding some extra air into the wort, just to encourage good yeast health. The other really nice thing about having a setup like this is that it's totally hands-free. So then I can get on with all the other things that I need to do before I finish the brew. Once I've transferred about half of my wort to the fermentation vessel, what I then do is I pitch my yeast direct. What I do after that is I move the fermentation vessel around so that the wort out can actually hit the yeast, and I'm very careful to make sure that all of the yeast is wet before continuing. I find that by doing this two-part process, by pouring the wort out at height and also covering all of the yeast with the wort, this aids the lag time considerably, and this one actually started within the hour. The yeast type that I've chosen to use with this brew is Mangrove Jacks M07 British Ale. Not only is this the desired British variety of yeast that's desired by this style, it's also a very neutral yeast aroma which will really allow these malts and hops to shine. I have on very good authority that this yeast really doesn't have any lag time at all, and that certainly was my experience, and it flocks out very nicely after 14 days in the fermenter and leaves behind a very nice clear beer with a very clean taste. You will note on the back of the packet of this yeast the recommended temperatures for fermentation are between 16 and 22. I've used a lot of yeast like this back in England in my commercial brewing days, and what I've found is that the best thing to do with yeast like this to get the best results is to start your wort off a couple of good degrees lower than the lowest fermentation temperature and just gradually tweak it up. This gives a very, very nice clean feeling to the beer. So I'm very happy to say that this was a very successful brew day. I did actually beat the target by some points, as you can see here. I'm also very happy with the colour of the wort that has resulted from this brew, though having said that, once the fruit is added, that is obviously going to change. So here's the low starting temperature that I was talking about. This will slowly climb up to the target temperature that I've set on the temperature controller of 18 degrees to start with. I'll then probably push it up to about 20 at the end, just so the yeast can clean up after itself. And it's also rather satisfying when you get dead on the amount that you plan for. There you go, look, exactly 15 litres. Fantastic. So all that follows now then is, after high fermentation I'll add the fruit, and then in the last 3 to 5 days I'll add the dry hops. I'll probably let this one sit for about 14 to 21 days depending on how things are going. Yeah, so this is what I was greeted with when I actually had transferred all of the wort. It's not very pretty, is it? So why did I throw all of my hops in naked, you may ask? Well, the answer to that is quite simple. As a regular reader and contributor to the various Grainfather Facebook forums, I see an awful lot of people make the comment that you can't use a lot of naked hops in the Grainfather, it just doesn't work, it clogs the pump, moan blah blah. For quite some time, people like myself have been advising people on the forum that it's just a simple case of a whirlpool. And you would need to do this with any pump-based system. Personally, I whirlpool after every brew. It doesn't matter how hoppy it is, it's just a good practice. I didn't really need to get Thor the whirlpooler out, but hey, it was a lot of fun and it made light work of things. One thing I do believe though, using a hop sock is certainly an awful lot easier in cleanup, and it's just as effective as naked, so hey, why not just use them? It also has the added benefit of not clogging up your pump. Well, I certainly had a lot of fun on this brew day, and I hope you enjoyed it too. As always, I look forward to seeing all of your comments, even if you don't agree with me. Hey, this is home brewing. It would be very boring if we all thought the same thing. That's one of the nice things about this hobby. So many different ways and so much passion. So if you did like this video, then please do go ahead and like it on YouTube. This really helps me out and allows the videos to be seen by a wider audience on YouTube. I've got a lot of videos in the pipeline for the future, so if you're interested in seeing what I've got coming up, then please subscribe for future content. If you have any questions on anything that I've covered in this video or in others, or anything to do with brewing in general, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. I'm more than happy to help. Until then, happy brewing!